The True Story of Gina Renee Hall, Video 6. Love is never glad about injustice, but rejoices when truth wins out. For almost 4 decades, the facts regarding Gina Renee Hall's murder case came from what the public was provided. Anyone who has not seen the case file cannot know all the truth. We can only know what was decided to present to us, to the public, during the trial. What was not presented was not known by most. So as in any murder case, how can anyone become an expert without having seen all of the relevant facts? In 1980, every report was on paper, boxes and boxes of leads called in, reports, investigations, interviews, all on paper. Not in a digital database where one keyword can be searched and you can find the answer in the information digital age. So from one person to know what everyone else was gathering, hearing, seeing, doing, would almost have been impossible without one person at the helm. And in Gina's case, at times, we had 3 separate police divisions recording this information, state and 2 local, county and city. And even in some instances, there were notes, interviews, statements given to authorities in the first week of the investigation. Those are the ones I trust. And then second interviews of the same people completed weeks later, making those comparisons quite interesting. I am grateful for the success in securing a conviction for the murder of Gina Renee Hall. I am grateful that her murderer is in prison. The basic truth in the trial was the truth. Gina did refuse him, and Steve Everly did kill Gina. And because he took her life, he does not deserve to live life as if he did not take hers. So why my quest for truth decades later? There were just too many unanswered questions. The family always knowing we did not have all of the truth. In 2016, when I was asked to read my sister's case file, that's when I saw what I was to see. Clearly, the facts that supported the truth, the same truth we, the family, had always known. So I share with others the facts I learned from my own personal experience reading her case file for hours and hours and hours, paying attention to the tiniest of details hidden in the layers of that case file. Gina's true story emerging. And had I never read the file for myself, seeing all of the unknown facts from the case, I'm sure my family would have never had the information that our family needed for self-validation of what we always knew to be true, that Gina did not leave the Marriott with Everly willingly. And now we even know so much more, like some things that we never would have suspected. Like Gina was at the lake house, alone or not. Which is why I'm releasing this information in these video excerpts early, as to begin to go ahead and provide factual accuracy now, not later, when the Miraculous Journey, A Day Made in Heaven's companion book, A Web of Lies, A Day Made in Hell, finally releases. Web of Lies is the chronological, factual account of Gina Renee Hall's murder case. These videos are for Gina. I am not just biased because I'm Gina's sister. I believe in truth and had those facts that I read, painted the same story as her killer and his friend, the composed story, I would have accepted it as truth. But they did not, and it is time to tell Gina's story. Gina deserves that. Not conjecture, not 40-year-old hearsay, not confirmation bias, not perceptions influenced or changed by the composed story, not hearing what you only choose to hear, trying to make sure it fits in your preconceived narrative. These are just straight facts from the file, the true story. Facts either substantiate the composed story I talk about in the video, one, or they do not. The first few videos were important to me to share, and for those good people who loved Gina still in unrest decades later about her murder, so they too could be in peace, as I have come to be, knowing truth. Truth sets the heart free. But the remaining of these videos, today and moving forward, will present a multitude of facts, the minutiae, for those who are determined to not let Gina's voice be heard. They can either continue to ignore the facts, or they can see the truth just as I did. And in my quest for truth, I began with a comparison of the many individual statements given to the police, especially those initial reports before the composed story gained momentum, including carefully paying attention to every word the creators of the composed story, Epperly and King, scribed in their own handwriting, their depositions, handwritten, providing much clarity. In this video, I will address two parts of the chronological timeline. One crucial in replacing the old composed story with a new foundational narrative to build upon, an initial interview that very few people knew about. A police interview before the family even knew about Gina's murderer and his best friend. But first, some background information that also provides clarity to begin to see a different narrative, a true narrative. So let's go back to the very beginning of this day made in hell. Saturday night, June 28, 1980, around 9 p.m. King calls Fisher to let him know to go on ahead with Cochran and Curtis, because Epperly was late getting ready and King wanted to drive out by the lake house on the way to Blacksburg. So King told the three to go on to Blacksburg, and King drives across town and picks up Epperly, driving on out to Claytor Lake. King's mom and stepdad had just left that morning for vacation, and they would be out of town for a week. King says he wanted to go by and check on the lake house because there was a large party going on up at the dam, and he later said that his mother asked him to keep an eye on the place because of vandalism in the neighborhood. Well, the vandalism statement was probed, and conclusion was no actual history of vandalism. So by 9:15 p.m., King and Epperly left to go on to the lake house. What King and Epperly did not realize was the fisherman down by the lake's edge, who under the bright, full moon watched every step King and Epperly took once they arrived at the lake house, including seeing them walk straight down the hill from the car towards the lake and enter the lake house on the ground floor level through the sliding glass doors that might not seem important, except King later states those sliding glass doors, were never used as an entry to the house because that door was always kept locked and it had no key, and it was not an initial access point to the house. Yet that fisherman describes every step, and that door was indeed used as the entry to the house that night. Just like I said in an earlier video, the parking lot key excuse story is the key to the truth. Was the sliding glass door left open all day and into the night, maybe anticipating lake house visitors? The witnessed lake house activity between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. will be addressed in a later video, and then we'll see. So King and Epperly arrive at the lake house. They go inside, the fisherman describing in detail how the two moved about the house, who walked where, as he could see it also clearly through the large windows of the 3-story lake house. The taller one, that would be King, stayed on the lower level, and the shorter one, that would be Epperly, went upstairs, walking back and forth as if looking for something. Then the two walked back down, out the sliding glass door, down to the dock by the lake before leaving. The fisherman was asked, "Did you see any boats at the dock?" "No, I dropped my line all around that dock. There were no boats." According to King, he traded out his brown Ford LTD for his mom's green '77 Thunderbird. And as they are pulling out, the driver stops, and the short one, with the girl-like haircut, got back out of the car, walked back down the hill to the sliding glass door, and then walked back up to the car. Well, back at our place, Gina was getting ready to leave, and she was as beautiful as ever. We had planned to go dancing together, Gina and I, after a week of midterm exams. We were looking forward to it. So why did I not go with my sister that Saturday night? There's only one reason I did not go. My now husband of 39 years, and then boyfriend of almost 4 years, well, we had had our very first very big fight. And I was sitting in the living room crying like a baby. My sister came down before she left to go to the Marriott. She consoled me and gave me that last face-to-face love advice. Sis, just follow your heart, not your head. You're always listening to your head. Just listen to your heart and you're going to know what you to do. You'll know. Then Gina left happily around 9:50 p.m. I went up to her bed shortly thereafter, exhausted not only from my week of graduate school exams, but from intense crying. There are so many untrue stories circulating as to why I did not go out with Gina that night. One account says I went to a different party with my boyfriend, and another somehow assumes that Gina tried to persuade me into coming along, but that I'd already made my mind up to stay home. Some even go so far as to indicate that this caused a lifelong guilt. Words matter. The word persuade is a back-and-forth scenario, with Gina trying to convince me to change my mind. And my only guilt, if you can even call it guilt, is that during every milestone of my life that I got to experience, the reality was that Gina did not. I focused on life here as if it was all that mattered. Well, the journey of 2016, the miraculous journey, when I followed my heart, it corrected that narrow-minded view by showing me clearly life is really just a dot on a forever eternal circle of life. And for that I am grateful. I have always openly shared my last moments with my sister, with so many people, throughout the decades, even when they didn't ask. Very vocal. Because Gina's words of wisdom for her big sister that night were very wise words. And I listened to Gina, and I followed my heart and not just my head. I have 2 amazing sons to show for it. It was my heart that shared the miraculous journey, and it is my heart and head that share these videos freely, because truth matters. The assumed and embellished account of the night continues. Gina, unable to find anyone else up for the excursion, making a decision to do something Gina had never done before. She would go out by herself. Why would it be told this way? My testimony was clear that she was independent and not reluctant to go places alone, that she went many places alone without me. I did also say, though, that it was unusual that night for Gina to go without me because we always did things together. But let's not look just at my testimony. Let's consider others from the trial. Friends of Gina's testified that it was not unusual for her to leave the group of girls and head on home early from dancing alone if she were tired or had homework or if she just wanted to. Those same character witnesses, college friends of Gina's, adding that it was rare for Gina to drink alcohol, just as I had testified. Not as told by some that she had 1 drink at every excursion. Not that it really matters or makes a difference, but it's just not the truth. How can anyone really know what Gina decided, including me? I can only know what I experienced. Consider this. Is it even possible that all relevant case facts arose during the trial? No. Yet stories are told based on court testimony. And if it did not come up in the trial, then fill-in happens, like the newspaper articles from that summer before the trial. Is it really logical to think that the police told the journalist all of the behind-the-scenes facts of the case during the summer of 1980? No, of course not. Hence, the concern by the Hall family of newspaper article research becoming a factual foundation of Gina's story in books and podcasts and shows, etc. Others can confirm I was quoted incorrectly and out of context quite frequently that summer by some of the newspaper journalists. Not all, but some. How many times was I quoted by news reporters as the one who said that Gina called me and told me she left a nightclub and went to the cabin on the lake to be with a man? That just makes a better story in that context. But it's not the truth. The facts matter. I was quoted correctly once in the very beginning, when Gina was just a missing person. And I share that excerpt on the Miraculous Journey website in Gina's case line. But then the news stories evolved, and the killer's composed account became the story, and my words were twisted to fit their story. That composed story. Just because a newspaper writes it does not make it true, and just because a newspaper is sourced in a book's bibliography does not make that statement accurate. And fill-in happens because it's just got to be a story. And unfortunately, it seems once a story is sensationalized, it becomes as if it is fact. Like saying Gina went with him to a secluded cabin. And that sells the story, but it certainly would not be an accurate description of a 3-story A-frame lake house home in a neighborhood with houses all around, surrounded by neighbors. Thank heavens for those neighbors who witnessed the activity at the lake house that night. That will be a video all of itself. It is imperative to provide accurate fill-in, especially when the storylines involve those who lived the experience, such as myself, or anyone else involved in the night. And that same principle applies to me, as I made the very difficult decision to share these facts. The basis of my decision to release this information was simple. Truth is truth. I will fast forward and cover the facts that are very important to begin to understand the true narrative, Jan Fisher's 2 separate interviews. These are the facts given from those involved, and we can still come to our own opinion as to whether it is relevant or not. Jan Fisher was a friend of mine. He and his mother were really one of the few local people that I knew while I was in college. He dated my college roommate. And it seems he was a good friend of Epperly and King and the other guys connected to the weekend. Well, Jan Fisher was interviewed twice. The first interview of Fisher only happened because of Fisher's association to me, and Gina being initially thought of as just a missing person before she became a homicide victim. Trooper Hall's initial notes from Fisher's first interview with Trooper Hall happened when Fisher came by our place while Trooper Hall was there interviewing my family and me. And Fisher was interviewed right after us and right after Gina's friend who stayed with us taking a leave of absence from the military to help us search. Fisher was interviewed right after that, before King, before Epperly. That was the order of the interviews as they were given to Trooper Hall during those initial hours of the investigation, which began on Monday, about 40 hours after Gina left for the Marriott. Fisher was interviewed before Bill King, who we know did not meet with Trooper Hall until Wednesday afternoon. So Fisher was interviewed sometime between Monday evening after my car had been found and the police became involved, and most likely prior to Tuesday evening when Epperly gave his first statement. Because right after Epperly gave his first statement to Trooper Hall on Tuesday evening, he went straight to see King. King says in his handwritten account that Epperly told him that Trooper Hall already knew about Fisher, Cochran, and Curtis. And that's important, just as is this statement. King also said Epperly told him that Trooper Hall said the girl had a bad sense of direction, which Trooper Hall would not have said. More on that later. Now this is where it gets really interesting. In that original Fisher statement, in regards to Gina being a missing person, Fisher told Trooper Hall that he had seen Gina at the Marriott, and that Fisher and his two friends, Cochran and Curtis, the three of them left the Marriott around 1:30 a.m. together with three girls, and they went to the girls' Terrace View apartment. The three stayed about an hour, and then Fisher's next and last sentence in this initial recap given to Trooper Hall, he says, Bill King came by the Terrace View apartments and picked up Robin Robinson and left with her, but he was not sure what time. So initially in those first few days of the week, there is no mention of King being with them in Fisher's original statement to Trooper Hall. That was important, so let me repeat it again. Fisher stated, the three of us, left with the three of them, and Bill came by sometime later. Now weeks later, end of July, the three, Fisher, Curtis, and Cochran, are all interviewed officially. And interestingly, each of the three late July interviews of the three friends were conducted by three different state investigators. In Fisher's late July interview, the three men now became four. King is now with them, leaving the Marriott as four together, with a stopover to eat pancakes before going to the three girls' apartment. And to clarify, Robin Robinson is not one of these three girls. In fact, that first interview statement, Fisher was not sure what time King came by to pick up Robin Robinson, King's date. But later, it now becomes definitive times. It now becomes a more precisely described statement of what happened, and it differs from his original. If you take Fisher and Curtis's statements, later statements of July, end of July, and you line them up with King's story, it is curious how the times given, all 45 minutes, are exactly the same with all three, same words, repeatedly. For this part of the timeline. Not about an hour or half an hour or so, or this statement, which was made by one of the four, I was pretty smashed and I don't know where we went to visit with those girls. But here is exactly what was stated weeks later by Fisher, Curtis, and King. We left the Marriott at 1:30 a.m., the four of us, and we went to the Pancake House. We were there about 45 minutes. Then we went to the girls' apartment. We stayed there about 45 minutes. As we were leaving the girls' apartment, we saw King drive by with a girl in the car, driving by slowly, seeing King waving at us. Exact words. Pretty straightforward. 3 or 4 men leave together, pancakes or not, 45-minute intervals at the same place in all three statements, same words. The three girls were never interviewed, which Trooper Hall did state it needed to be done in his final report before being replaced as the lead investigator. King's variations are abundant, stating he was in the three girls' apartment when he looked out and saw Robin's light on, deciding to call her. Other variations also regarding how he connected with Robin that night. Robin's account also differs. Details matter. Timeline is very important. Who was where, when, and with whom? I wondered when I first saw all of this, Was there a need for an alibi sometime after midnight and before 3 a.m.? The statement's always interesting, King's and Epperly's handwritten, so no question whose words they were. The statements are filled with conflicting timelines, contradictions, sometimes even within one person's same statement from beginning to end. And if those statements had been compared, someone might have determined a need to question further. But again, different investigators did the interviews. The premise that Gina went with Epperly of her own accord, assumed to be true, immediately becoming the theory by all. And everything was built from that theory. That could have influenced the disconnect, especially the discrepancies between the original Fisher interview and the later July interview so easily seen when I read the case file. I believe perceptions were influenced regarding what really happened at the Marriott because of what Curtis and Fisher will say happens next in the timeline. The Lake House Horseshoe Picnic invite, just a few hours later, noon on Sunday. A clear message from me would be to emphasize that the entire Marriott part of the composed story was orchestrated. Pawns are useful in the game of chess. They block access to the king when used effectively, sometimes sacrificed to protect. Sometimes the weakest piece in the game becomes the pawn because it cannot move backwards once it moves forward. And eventually, most blocking pawns are sacrificed to win the game. But if a pawn makes it all the way to the end, it takes on a new identity, a new role. It usually gets queened. The next videos will delve into the Marriott and the timeline a few hours later at the Sunday afternoon Horseshoe Picnic, to shed more light on why, in my opinion, this is a chess game. Recently, a Johnny came lately who thinks of himself as a spokesperson for my sister Gina and the details surrounding her murder, called to tell me personally that the information I share is hearsay, rumor, and that only the men who were the experts involved can know what happened, not me. I don't think you could be much more involved than I was in 1980. And what I share is straight fact from the case files. But if just my own opinion, I tried to say it's just my opinion. But my opinions are based on those early first-hand accounts before perceptions and stories were influenced. It would be interesting to find a handful of non-biased people today. Say, a handful out of 100 people who can recount today, 4 decades later, exactly what transpired in 1980, especially if they were not even directly involved. And many not even alive to interview. I trust the initial factual reports regarding the exact details of that summer. And because I lived it, I can tell what I lived, what I experienced, what I saw, what I know. And now, decades later, I can openly share all of the case facts I learned in 2016 as I read those official reports about my sister Gina Renee Hall's murder. And I do not ignore the facts like some when they do not fit in that old composed narrative. Like the driver's side broken door handle, inside driver's side car door handle ripped off. That certainly should throw a monkey wrench into that old composed story. But instead, people say Epperly must have broken it in his rage. Or this ignorant statement: parts on cars break all the time, and you're just being illogical, Delana, to jump to the conclusion that Gina broke it. We who loved Gina, we were there that day, and we saw what we were to see. In one of Gina's last letters sent to me in March 1980, she quoted, prophetically, "Love is never glad about injustice, but rejoices when truth wins out.